The first years of filmmaking were exciting times for the filmmakers and audiences. Yet if we are to appreciate what they did and saw, we must accept the fact that their cinema was very different from our own. These are excerpts from The Great Train Robbery, which Edwin Porter made for the Edison Company in 1903. This film could only be made because important changes had occurred in the motion picture industry during the preceding 8 years. During this period, one person seemed always to be in the right place at the right time. The man who made this film, Edwin S. Porter. In many ways, to trace Porter's fortunes is to study the emergence of American cinema. Late in the 19th century, Porter's future employer, Thomas Edison, is busy remaking the amusement world. In 1877, the Wizard of Menlo Park invents the phonograph. By the 1890s, people go to phonograph parlors where they listen to the latest Edison records. Although preoccupied with other projects, Edison and his associates, particularly William Laurie Dixon, find spare time to develop a motion picture camera. They name it the kinetograph. Edison, performing here for his camera, writes in 1888,
I am experimenting on an instrument to do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. That is, the recording and reproduction of things in motion in such a form as to be cheap, practical, and convenient. This apparatus I call a kinetoscope moving view.
By 1894, vaudeville performers and prize fighters come to Edison's laboratory to be kinetographed.
Over at the Black Maria, several attendants were busy fixing the kinetograph so that there might be no slips or mistakes in photographing the impending struggle. The Maria reminded everyone of a big coffin. It was covered with black tar paper, secured to the woodwork by big metal top nails. Half of the roof could be raised or lowered like a drawbridge by means of ropes, pulleys, and weights, so that the sunlight could strike squarely on the space before the machine. At 11:45, everything was ready. Jim Corbett, the heavyweight champion, and Peter Courtney, his opponent, were first requested to pose in fighting attitudes for an ordinary photograph. Then they went to their corners and waited for the signal to begin the battle. And when the word was given, the kinetograph began to buzz.
The Corbett-Courtney fight is neither shown in theaters nor projected onto a screen. Instead, patrons frequent phonograph parlors. At Tally's in Los Angeles, there is a bank of peephole kinetoscopes along the south wall of the store. The spectators peer into peepholes and watch a minute of film pass through the viewer. They pay 1 nickel per round. See, 1 round per machine. While Tally shows moving pictures to his customers, Edwin Porter is stationed in Brooklyn, where he invents electrical devices for the U.S. Navy. Little information about his personal life survives this era. His enlistment record, however, offers a few facts.
Edwin Stanton Porter, born 21 April 1870, Connellsville, Pennsylvania. Eyes brown, hair light brown, complexion sunburned. Height 5 feet 4 3/4 inches, weight 150 pounds.
Films are projected onto a screen for the first time in 1895 as inventors in different countries adapt Edison's moving pictures to the magic lantern. In the United States, C. Francis Jenkins and Thomas Armat perfect their Vitascope. For commercial purposes, it is renamed the Edison Vitascope and opens at Coster and Biles Music Hall in New York City during April of '96. Edwin Porter, intrigued by the possibilities of moving pictures, comes in from the Brooklyn Navy Yard to install the Vitascope. Newspapers report.
Last night, the new thing at Coster and Biles was Edison's Vitascope. The ingenious inventor's latest toy was the projection of kinetoscopic figures in magic lantern fashion. In the center of the balcony of the big music hall, there's a curious object that looks from below like a double turret of a big monitor. When they were ready to show the invention, a big drop curtain was lowered. It had a huge picture frame painted in the center with an enclosed space white. The band struck up a lively air, and from overhead could be heard a whirling sound that lasted a few moments. Then, flashed out across the screen, a life-size image of two dancing girls.
The hit of the show so far, as marvelous lifelike effects and mirthful results with the audience go, is the amusing, much-prepared-for kiss, the May Irwin kiss from the Widow Jones. In this, the effect was wonderful, and the figures were so large that one could tell by the motion of the lips what Rice was saying to May Irwin and what Miss Irwin was replying. The facial expression was the widow to the T, and ditto Rice, and the real scene itself never excited more amusement than did its vitascopic presentment, and that is saying much. Their smiles and glances and expressive gestures and the final, joyous, overpowering, luscious osculation was repeated again and again, while the audience fairly shrieked and howled approval. Of course, this form of entertainment is in its infancy, and its possibilities are infinite. Certain it is that no novelty presented here for years has been as interesting or as suggestive.
The success of moving pictures encourages a few adventurous men to scour the Northeast in search of exciting subjects. Porter, now out of the Navy, travels from California to Central America, projecting their films. It's nearing the turn of the century. New York City has a population of 3.5 million people. Within the next 10 years, most of these ghetto children will become film patrons. But in 1897, there are weeks when New Yorkers can only see films at the Eden Museum, where Porter is hired to exhibit moving pictures. The museum's publicist informs local newspapers.
5,000 people visited the Eden Musée last Sunday, and for the first time in several years, it became necessary to turn people away. The fact that 4 times as many moving pictures are shown there as anywhere else is one reason for its popularity. In addition, these pictures are taken especially for the Musée, and the views are reproduced on the most perfect machine ever made.
The Musée, originally known for its waxworks, becomes a major motion picture center. Porter and his colleagues do not show film loops over and over again. Instead, they develop projectors that combine short films and slides to create a documentary-like program. They apply this technique to films taken by the Musee's cameraman, William Paley. In 1898, Paley is placed under contract by the Edison Company and dispatched to Cuba, where he covers the impending Spanish-American War. He travels on boats provided by William Randolph Hearst, whose yellow journalism helped spark war with Spain. Soon the cameraman sends back motion pictures of the sunken battleship Maine in Havana Harbor. In New York, the films are developed in oblong wooden tubs and dried on cylindrical racks. Some are even colored by hand. As the war begins, Paley's subjects are offered for sale by McGuire and Backus. Showmen come to their offices, hat in hand, eager to buy the films. Young Edwin Porter is there too. He selects and purchases the short films, which are just as Paley shot them. Each one-shot film lasts half a minute on the screen. Back at the theater, Porter and his associates organize the random films into a dramatic account of the war.
The Eden Musée is becoming a headquarters for the soldiers in the city. Since they returned from war, scarcely a day passes that at least 500 do not visit the Musée. They take the greatest interest in the war pictures. A genuine novelty in the views has now been arranged. It is the nature of a panorama of the whole war. The moving picture scenes begin with the battleship Maine, entering Havana Harbor, and include the harbor after the Maine explosion. The burial of the Maine sailors is shown, then troops leaving Tampa for Cuba, and other equally vivid scenes up to the storming of Santiago. Frequently, the patriotism of the audience rose to such an extent that there would be cheering.
Porter acts like a film editor. His creative contributions to the Musee's programs help to fill its theater with cheering crowds. These shows galvanize support for America's imperial adventures and also begin to establish a steady public appetite for film. By the 1900 presidential election, theater marquees feature moving pictures to lure patrons into vaudeville houses like Proctor's 23rd Street Theater. A few blocks away, the Edison Company uses these plans to construct a new indoor film studio. Edwin Porter, who has left the Eden Musée, is hired to run it. One of his first pictures employs actors to reenact a news story then featured on the front page of New York's papers. Porter is inspired by political cartoons, which lampoon Carrie Nation and her hatchet brigade of women prohibitionists, then destroying saloons in Kansas. One motion picture executive explains this approach to filming.
In building up our business, We were of the opinion at first that the public desired a series of finished and artistic pictures representing a scene or event of historic interest or artistic value. But we soon found what the public demanded of us was the prompt and reliable service of a daily newspaper. That is to say, the public has expected us to gather the news in a pictorial way and disseminate it at once.
Edwin Porter does not create original narratives for his films. He relies on well-known stories to guide the audience's understanding. Spectators enjoy his film, The Capture of the Biddle Brothers, because the killer's escape and subsequent recapture make scandalous news across the country.
The public throughout the world is acquainted with the capture of the Biddle Brothers and Mrs. Soffel. Through the aid of Mrs. Soffel, the warden's wife, the brothers escaped from the Pittsburgh jail on January 30th. Our picture, which is a perfect reproduction of the capture, is realistic and exciting.
Some exhibitors make films like this one even more realistic by adding sound effects from behind the screen. Porter has switched roles. Now he makes the one-shot films, while others either show them in a variety format or edit them into unified programs. When Porter doesn't find ideas in New York's newspapers or theaters, he photographs the city streets. Films like these sometimes are used by socially conscious exhibitors to contrast rich and poor, to contrast Fifth Avenue and the Lower East Side.
The ballroom was filled with fashion's throng. It shone with 1,000 lights. And there was a woman who passed along, the fairest of all the sights. A girl to her lover then softly sighed, "There's riches at her command." But she married for wealth, not for love, he cried, though she lives in a mansion grand. She's only a bird in a gilded cage, a beautiful sight to see. You may think she's happy and free from care. She's not, though she seems to be. 'Tis sad when you think of her wasted life, for youth cannot mate with age, and her beauty was sold for an old man's gold. She's a bird in a gilded cage.
In July 1901, Porter's boss, Thomas Edison, wins an important patent victory against his major competitor, the Biograph Film Company. While Biograph appeals the decision, Edison's lawyers force other American filmmakers out of business. Meanwhile, Porter becomes increasingly involved in the process of editing. He combines his experience as an exhibitor and his position as a cameraman to make films of more than one shot. A film like The Finish of Bridget McKean begins to take editorial control away from the exhibitor. Porter first experiments by simply juxtaposing two shots. He borrows this use of a final punchline from comic strips. A political cartoon series in Hearst's New York Journal mocks Teddy Roosevelt's efforts at self-promotion and media manipulation. Porter turns two of the panels into a two-shot comedy. The Edison Company advertises the results in its catalog.
Terrible Teddy, the Grizzly King. A burlesque of Theodore Roosevelt hunting mountain lions in Colorado. The scene opens in a very picturesque wood. Teddy, with his large teeth, is seen running down the hill with shotgun in hand, followed by his photographer and press agent. He reconnoiters around a large tree and finally discovers the mountain lion. He kneels on one knee and takes a careful shot. Immediately upon the discharge of the gun, a huge black cat falls from the tree, and Teddy whips out his Bowie knife, leaps on the cat, and stabs it several times. Then poses while his photographer makes a picture, and the press agent writes up the thrilling adventure.
In the summer of 1901, a long-standing argument erupts. Admirals Sampson and Schley both claim credit for America's 1898 naval victory in Santiago Bay during the Spanish-American War. Porter comments on the issue in the Sampson-Schley controversy. In this picture, Schley is on the bridge of the battleship Brooklyn, courageously directing an attack against the Spanish enemy. Edison adds, "Tell exhibitors."
Exhibitors, now's your chance to make good with the Sampson-Schley controversy illustrated in moving pictures, the greatest naval and dramatic production ever attempted in animated photographs.
Porter shows Schley risking his life alongside America's heroic sailors. Shot of this film is based on a political cartoon panel in the New York Journal. The second shot on the well-known painting, Man Behind the Gun. A few weeks later, Porter shoots a third scene, modeled after the second panel of the cartoon. Cartoon captions point out that Sampson was sipping tea while Schley was fighting on the Brooklyn. What happened simultaneously is shown successively on the screen. Here Porter encounters new problems. Problems of time and space. How to connect scenes which happen simultaneously. How to show an event using two different points of view. Porter will struggle with these issues in later films, but in September 1901, he is distracted by the biggest news event of the new century. He and other Edison cameramen are sent to the Pan American Exposition, where they film President McKinley giving a speech. The next day, McKinley is shot by the Polish anarchist Leon Szolgasz. The Edison Company exploits this news event by filming the funeral and other incidents surrounding the president's death. Exhibitors buy these short films and use them to eulogize McKinley. They break box office records across the country. Thousands of solid citizens cause near riots after being turned away from sold-out theaters. Porter goes on to film a reenactment of the assassin's death. It's called The Execution of Szolgasz. The opening shots of the prison, taken on the morning of the execution, lend authenticity to the dramatization. The exhibitor retains some control over the editing. He is given the option of purchasing this film with or without these opening panoramas. Inside, the guards take Szolgasz from his cell to the execution chamber. The acting is restrained, further heightening the realism. While the guards go to get Szolgasz, the electricians test the electric current using a bank of Edison light bulbs. Szolgasz's stumble, his one moment of weakness, is shown. As the straps are tightened, he mumbles, "I'm awfully sorry I could not see my father." Warden Meade raises his hand, and at 7:12, electrician Davis turns the switch that throws 1,700 volts into the living body. The whole attitude is one of extreme tension. At 7:15, the current is turned off for good. The warden announces, "Gentlemen, the prisoner is dead." Coney Island in the early 1900s. New Yorkers sometimes come here to see pictures in small theaters, nestled among the other entertainments. With only Edison able to sell films to American showmen, there is a shortage of exciting subjects. The concept of cinema as a visual newspaper wears thin. Film theaters are closing. Porter films amusements, like elephants shooting the chutes, which are more exciting when seen live. The big attractions are not motion pictures, but spectacular live reenactments of catastrophes, like the Galveston flood, which killed 5,000 people in 1900. Of all the live performances at Coney Island, the most popular is the staged fire rescue, Fighting the Flames. A program describes the action.
Upon the ringing of the alarm, the men leap from their beds and slide down the brass pole. The horses rush under the harness. The men mount the engines and out they go on the run. The fire scene shows a hotel in the foreground on fire, in which are a number of inmates. The flames discovered on the first floor of the hotel cut off their escape. The inmates at the windows are driven from story to story by fire and smoke. Streams of water are thrown upon the burning hotel by the engine and the water tower.
Live performances like this offer drama and melodrama American filmmakers do not yet capture on their own. In the spring of 1902, the Biograph Company wins its appeal, overturning Edison's earlier patent victory. Porter, facing renewed competition, responds by making a series of story films. The first is Appointment by Telephone.
Yes, miss, at the cafe in 5 minutes? My hat. Oh, boy. See ya.
In this simple three-shot comedy, Porter achieves a smooth narrative progression from one scene to the next. The exterior of the restaurant in the second shot establishes the sidewalk, which plays an important role in the final scene.
Thank you. Menu, please. So, where shall we go after our drink?
Wherever you want, sweetie.
The sets are now more than a simple backdrop. They create an illusion of perspective for the audience.
Out of my way! Oh, George, you terrible man!
Oh, dear,
You've done it again!
Porter's next films are influenced by the French musician turned filmmaker, Georges Méliès, posing here for a picture with his family. The most famous and respected moving picture producer in 1902, he has a glass-enclosed studio outside of Paris. At his own catalog notes.
Georges Méliès is the originator of the class of cinematograph films which are made from artificially arranged scenes, the creation of which has given new life to the trade at a time when it was dying out. He conceived the idea of portraying comical, magical, and mystical views, and his creations have been imitated without success ever since.
One of Méliès' most popular films is Bluebeard. Here the devil tempts Bluebeard's eighth wife into entering the forbidden room. She soon discovers her 7 predecessors. In the spring of 1902, Méliès' methods of storytelling are adopted by Edwin Porter. At the Edison studio, Porter begins work on Jack and the Beanstalk, a fairy tale film that tells a complicated story in 10 scenes.
When selecting a special film as a headline attraction to your entertainment, remember that this fairy tale is known to every child throughout the civilized world. It appeals to every man and woman because they remember it as one of the most pleasant illusions of their childhood. The subject was carefully studied, and every scene posed with a view to following as closely as possible the accepted version of Jack and the Beanstalk.
Although the exhibitor no longer has control over the editing, he still can narrate the image to his liking.
The good fairy meets the village butcher at the bridge and informs him that Jack will pass that way with a cow he can doubtlessly purchase for a hatful of beans. Jack being a very careless and foolish lad. The bargain is struck. Jack runs away to show his mother what he considers a very gratifying price for this beautiful animal. Jack returns to his mother's cottage, bringing the beans in his hat and showing them to her in great glee. His mother, disappointed, angrily throws the beans in the garden and sends him supperless to bed. The good fairy stands beside Jack's cot, directing his dream. Jack dreams of the growing beanstalk and the award that awaits him who dares to climb it. Jack, looking out from his window, finds the enormous beanstalk. Remembering his dream, he believes he can climb it with ease. Remembering his mother's scolding, he is cautious and consults her. She protests vigorously against his climbing the beanstalk, but Jack sends her into the house on a pretext and starts up the beanstalk without her knowledge. The mother commands him to return, but the dauntless boy only laughs and continues to climb. His playmates, who are calling for Jack on their way to school, join hands, dance around the beanstalk, and witness Jack's start on his perilous journey. Here we see Jack 2/3 the way up the beanstalk. He pauses to wave his hat to his playmates and mother.
Because Porter produces and edits this film, he can show Jack leaving one shot and entering the next. The story can move easily from outdoors to indoors, from real world to the magic kingdom.
Jack arrives at the top of the beanstalk in what appears to be a fairyland. He is very sleepy and lays down on a bed of moss to rest. His good fairy appears and tells Jack the story of the giant, who, many years ago, killed and robbed his father, who was a knight residing in the castle, and drove his mother from their home. She then causes a vision of the giant's castle to appear before Jack, and commands him to go to the giant's house, where great fortunes await him. Jack is admitted to the castle by the giant's wife. The giant suddenly enters. In great fear lest he kill and eat the little boy, the good wife hides Jack in a large kettle.
In telling the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk, Porter becomes the first American to make an elaborate story film. It is an instant success. The popularity of films like this further solidifies creative control in the production company.
The giant finally falls asleep from the playing of the harp. Jack creeps from his hiding place in the kettle and steals the hen and as many of the bags of gold as he can carry away. Just as he leaves the kitchen door, the giant awakens and, seizing his great cudgel, chases our little hero, who is now thoroughly frightened. The chase to the beanstalk has been very close, but Jack reaches it a little ahead of the giant. He quickly scrambles down with the precious hen hanging over his shoulder. He commands his mother to bring him the axe, and vigorously chops at the beanstalk until it falls in a heap, bringing the giant to the ground with a mighty crash, breaking his neck and instantly killing him. Here the good fairy again appears and informs Jack that he has acted like a brave knight's son, and that he deserves to have his inheritance restored to him. Jack and his mother are seated in the fairy's boat, proceeding to the castle, which is their future home.
During the summer of 1902, Méliès makes his famous film, A Trip to the Moon, which is quickly imported to the United States and pirated by American motion picture companies. Porter makes duplicate copies of the film for the Edison Company. In the process, he sees something in A Trip to the Moon which changes his approach to film production. Later, he recalls,
from laboratory examination of some of the popular films of the French pioneer director Georges Méliès, trick films like A Trip to the Moon, I came to the conclusion that a picture telling a story in continuity form might draw the customers back to the theaters, so I set to work in that direction.
Porter finds one moment particularly inspiring. First, from afar, the rocket hits the man in the moon. Then the rocket lands again in a closer view. The same action is shown twice from two different points of view. This form of continuity helps audiences follow the story. Later that month, Porter experiments with this idea of continuity, applying it to the problem of depicting two simultaneous actions in How They Do Things on the Bowery. The film shows a country rube who comes to New York City and gets picked up by a prostitute. After administering a Mickey Finn, the woman takes his valuables and leaves. When the waiter discovers the sleeping rube, he kicks the farmer out onto the street and sends his suitcase after him. This action is repeated in the following scene as we learn what went on outside of the saloon. A paddy wagon comes down the street and the police wait for the rube and his suitcase to be ejected. Although Porter's methods for making motion pictures have changed radically in a few years, his approach to continuity has not yet entered the modern era. His next film, Life of an American Fireman, shows this quite clearly. This print of the film was re-edited in the 1930s using modern concepts of continuity. It featured parallel editing. The action switched back and forth between interior and exterior. In this version, action did not overlap from one shot to the next. Instead, there were match cuts. Each shot picked up from where the last left off. Much of our understanding of early cinema was based on this modernized sequence. It seemed primitive, but logical. Yet in 1903, audiences might have found this story construction difficult to follow. When Life of an American Fireman is first released, audiences enjoy the following version. This masterful film extends Porter's earlier experiments in overlapping action. It presents a method of story construction that dominates the film industry for the next 5 years. Train Robbery, The Ex-Convict, and other story films made over the next few years established Porter as the leading American director of his time. Soon exhibitors began to open small nickel theaters. Since they no longer have to construct their own shows out of short films, these entrepreneurs change programs daily to attract customers. By 1907, over 1 million people pay 5 cents each day to see a half hour of moving pictures. The Edison Company responds to the growing demand for story films by building a new studio in the Bronx.
The Edison studio is said to be one of the finest and largest in the world. The scenic end of the studio, corresponding to the stage in a theater, is 60 by 60 feet and 40 feet high. Here are set the scenes for film productions that cannot be made with natural outdoor backgrounds.
Edwin Porter is in charge. The centralization of creative control in the production companies, which he pioneered, now leads to new changes. Changes with parallels in other industries. At the mammoth Westinghouse factories, photographed in 1904, production is not only centralized, but increasingly standardized. Work is broken down into isolated tasks which require little skill. In film studio and factory, the stress is on speed and rapid production. Like these workers, exhibitors need fewer and fewer skills. Now women splice together film prints on assembly lines. They spend their days cutting shots into an order already determined by the director. Along similar lines, Porter forms a stock company of actors. They assume different roles with dizzying rapidity. Mass production comes to film studios as directors provide entertainment for working-class patrons seeking distractions from factory regimentation and life in the urban ghetto. While Porter once spent 6 weeks shooting the 8-minute film Jack and the Beanstalk, by 1909, his studio turns out a 15-minute film every 3 days. Porter is unhappy about these new conditions.
The bane of the producer is the rule requiring the turning loose of so many reels of film per week, regardless entirely of surrounding circumstances. You must allow sufficient time to do those things which should be done, and to avoid those things which should not be done.
Porter not only resists mass production, but his methods of storytelling do not change. In 1908, Porter makes Rescued from an Eagle's Nest. As this excerpt shows, he continues to use the overlapping action he pioneered 6 years earlier. But what was cheered in 1903 now was criticized by reviewers.
Rescued from an Eagle's Nest. A feeble attempt to secure a trick film of a fine subject. The boldness of the conception is marred by bad lighting and poor blending of outside photography with studio work. The trick of the eagle with its wire wings is too evident to the audience, while the fight between the man and the eagle is poor and out of vision. We look for better things.
Porter gives the leading role in this film to an out-of-work actor, D.W. Griffith. Griffith will soon move to the Biograph Company and become America's foremost director. At Biograph, he will employ parallel editing and other modern storytelling techniques which make Porter's productions look increasingly antiquated. By 1909, the Edison studio has gone from cottage industry to corporation. Thomas Edison wants his studio manager to play the role of efficiency expert, but Porter is unwilling to change. First, he is demoted. H.D. Plimpton, a rug merchant and devotee of scientific management, takes over as studio head. A few months later, Edison has Porter fired. Although Edwin Porter continues to make motion pictures for another 6 years, he is no longer in the film industry's vanguard. Porter's last employer, Adolf Zucker, later characterized the filmmaker.
Porter was, I have always felt, more of an artistic mechanic than a dramatic artist.
Perhaps Zucker knew Porter at the wrong time. In the period before the Nickelodeon, Porter found innovative ways to tell elaborate stories with skill and wit. It was his tragedy that he could not adapt to a new era of moving pictures, an era led by D.W. Griffith, Thomas Ince, and Cecil B. DeMille. Although Edwin Porter made his last film in 1915, he lived another 30 years, a man forgotten by the film industry he helped to create.